Now, recently I've been playing a lot of games from yesteryear, more specifically from the 6th and 7th generation. And what puzzles me is that a lot of people believe that the games from these generations are much better than now. But then you'll have people argue that the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis era of games is the best, and the list goes on. Now, of course, none of their opinions are invalid. In fact, a lot of people believe that the modern era of gaming is the best of what have happened to the industry in a long time. And I am one of those swine. Now, of course, we also have to count in the factor of nostalgia, that people will look back to their past with rose-tinted glasses. So before people compare newer game with an older one, first of all, we have to ask ourselves a few questions. First of all, are the two games similar in the first place? If not, the door's that way. Second of all, is the older game actually better, or you prefer it to the newer one because you had better memories playing it as a kid? Sorry, bad example, but you get the point. So we're gonna talk about the topic of retro gaming and why people, even those who actually didn't board at that time or have any memories of that time, are attracted to it. First of all, we have to ask ourselves, how long does it take a game to become a retro game? Well, I think a game becomes retro when its design and the trend it's following had died down and a new trend has started. For example, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. It has been 11 years since it first released, but the Call of Duty series is still following the same format ever since. So I don't consider Modern Warfare 2 a retro game, I consider it being old. And also a similar example, Skyrim. It also released in 2011. However, the formula, which is the open world quest based formula, is still being utilized by Bethesda. A similar case is Mega Man. I'm mainly talking about the vanilla Mega Man, if you will, on NES and the X series on SNES. During the early 2000s, Capcom made a bunch of spin-offs to Mega Man, such as the Battle Network series. At that point, classic Mega Man has basically become extinct for a while, and that made the games back on the NES and SNES retro games because the classic Mega Man formula isn't being utilized anymore. Well, at least for Capcom. But the follow-ups such as Mega Man 9 and 10 are considered retro revivals, and we'll talk about them later. Now that we established the definition of a retro game, let's move on to what most people consider as the holy grail of retro game, with the help of these guys. Which also brings us to one of the biggest hurdles people have to go through when getting into retro gaming, and that is the pricing. Since these systems are like 40 years old, they have stopped production a long time ago, which means that the only way to obtain these systems are through websites like eBay, and it will cost a pretty penny just to get your hands on them. And that's just console. We still haven't talked about the pricing of the games yet. Of course, there's always a cheaper option. You can get one of those high-end aftermarket consoles that will probably run and look better than the original counterparts, such as the AVS for the NES, the Super NT for the SNES, but they are also pretty expensive nonetheless, although much better than buying the original counterparts as most of them are broken or will be broken really quickly, and you'll have to spend a pretty penny to mod it into HDMI and all that stuff. So obviously you'll think, what's the next option? And I present to you this is dumb. Sure, it's the most accessible way and the easiest way to experience old games. But porting a game into a different console doesn't mean that you can sell the game at full price. Still, I get that remasters are quite important. Remaking a game will take a long time and a lot of money, so the next best thing is to bring their older games to a modern console, so the fans can enjoy the older games in a higher resolution and a stable frame rate. And at the same time, it may bring newer fans to the table, which brings us a win-win situation between the companies and the fans. The fans will know that the company still more or less cares about their favorite franchise, and the companies don't have to work as hard to get their $60 per purchase. Another reason that remasters will probably always be relevant is that modern consoles usually don't support backwards compatibility. In fact, I think Xbox is the only console on the market that still supports physical games from their first console. And that's because of reasons that I find more entertaining to present it visually. So of course, the game companies will have to port the games to the newer console. And then they'll slap a remastered subtitle on the box and make it seem like we didn't just spend 2 weeks on this. And obviously, people have noticed this. So that's why some big companies like Nintendo threw in a bunch of old NES and SNES games into their Nintendo Online membership thing. And honestly, it's pretty cool that they did this. I mean, Nintendo isn't really good when it comes down to, porting their older games. I mean, there has to be a reason why Super Mario Galaxy 2 still isn't on the Switch. I remember them posting a video about the comparison between Twilight Princess HD and Vanilla, and I thought the Vanilla was the HD version. Nevertheless, this is so cool that I can play all of these retro games on the go whenever I want. There is a pretty good selection here, and the emulation quality isn't very bad. And on that note, I think I finally finished my list of all the reasons to purchase the Nintendo Online membership. But of course, making people pay just to access the N64 games, now that's fucking stupid. All in all, re-releases and remasters are a great way to experience the old classics. I mean, sure, sometimes they will be blatantly overpriced and not getting any cool extra content or any enhancements at all, but at least it's still an official way to play the games. Welcome to Purgatory. I am not gonna lie. Emulation is awesome. The fact that you can just download software and some file dumps online and play those old games that I never got to experience in all of their glory. You get to play them in 4K and smooth and crispy 60 FPS. This is everything I wanted out of a retro gaming experience. Well, of course, this is a very controversial topic, and there are usually two main arguments surrounding this. The first one is that this is considered as video game piracy, and you're basically stealing the data the developers worked tirelessly for. And of course, that is a perfectly legitimate argument. Some games have received low sales is because of piracy, people downloading the game for free without the developer's consent. But if you think about it, these are mainly 10 to 20-year-old games. We're talking old games here, and even if you're buying it off of a retro game shop, the developers are not getting any profit from it. And that is why Nintendo is constantly being ridiculed by the internet of taking down fan-made remakes or maybe even file dumps of older games. But of course, they still refuse to port most of the games to their newer systems. So there's a taboo here. In my eyes, emulation isn't a form of piracy per se, it is more of a form of game preservation. So many games, especially if they were a cult status, probably wouldn't leave a platform that they launched on because the developers doesn't see this as a good moneymaker if they port it or remaster it. But with the power of emulation, fans are bringing the experience to newer people, thus creating more fans. The other big argument, if you're emulating a game, you're not playing under the environments the developers intended to. You're using save states, you're using rewinds, you aren't using the right controller. To the last part, I fully agree with that. I mean, have you tried playing a fighting game of any kind using the Xbox 360 controller? This D-pad is for mice. But considering using save features, using rewinds as a wrong way to play these games, I think it's completely false. I mean, come on, think about it. Do you think developers back in the time purposely don't want the players to pick up right where they're left off? Of course not. Otherwise, they wouldn't rely on some crappy workaround like a password system or extra lives and continues. In fact, I think gaming emulation is a very good source for people to learn about video game history. With the power of modern hardware, they can see the limitations that the developers went through creating a game that we cherish and love and call it a masterpiece. I wouldn't discover one of my favorite racing games of all time, Burnout 3 Takedown, through the power of emulation, since there isn't a PC port. In fact, emulation puts tons of video game ports to shame. Again, look at Super Mario 3D All-Stars, a port released in 2021. But however, the games Sunshine and Super Mario 64 still runs at 30 FPS. How did they mess that up? Fans has been emulating the game in 60 FPS and 4K resolution for ages, and somehow a fully funded port funded by Nintendo, made by industry professionals, still failed to do the simplest thing, the borderline standard that all gaming ports should meet. All in all, in my opinion, emulation is a great way to play these games, but I will still recommend you to buy the officially made port, as the money that the developers deserve are actually going to them. And now, I think it's time to answer the most important question. Why is retro gaming so important and so cherished? To answer that, I have to tell you a story of how a 13-year-old boy discovers Sonic. Yes, as a franchise that the development team said that the revolution of Sonic is a Unity asset flip. Anyway, cynical comments aside, my favorite Sonic game is Sonic Mania. Hey, come on guys, I was also excited of the release of Knuckles Chaotix. I was just negative 12 years old. Sonic Mania is possibly the best introduction to classic Sonic I could have asked for. It showed me all the classic stages from the Genesis era, and the charm of 16-bit graphics and music. Even to this day, I'll still absentmindedly hum the tune of Chemical Plant Zone. Without this game and my love towards it, this video probably will never happen, and I'll probably write off all these wonderful games that the generation before me had played. So thank you, Sonic Mania. And also thanks to all the retros revivals out there that will introduce more and more people to retro gaming. Oh, that reminds me, retro revivals. Those games are usually games that celebrated a simpler, older time of said franchise. Usually it is made by the first-party developers that first developed the franchise, but a lot of times it is developed by fans, like Sonic Mania. I love retro revivals. They're such a good way to bring new fans to an older and maybe even dying franchise. I know I talk too much about Sonic Mania, but just hear me out. It's been so long that the Sonic team had made a classic Sonic game, and Sonic Mania showed everybody that people still want a classic Sonic game. The same thing happened with the Rainbow Six franchise. It used to be a bunch of hardcore shooters, but in the 2000s, hardcore tactical shooters had mainly lost their appeal. People began playing games like Call of Duty and Halo, and meanwhile Counter-Strike is basically dominating the tactical shooter scene. After the Rainbow Six Vegas duology, many believe that the franchise is dormant, but Ubisoft created a game called Rainbow Six Siege that basically saved the franchise. And even though the game is having a lot of issues, but that's another video for another day.
我左手都不放在键盘上了。我操！
Well, since I covered all the topics that there is to cover about retro gaming, I guess I'll give some recommendations to get into it. In my opinion, getting the original game consoles is basically overkill. You can basically buy those aftermarket consoles, and even though they're around the same price, they'll probably last longer and you'll get a better experience with it. Number two, if you're really into Nintendo games, you can maybe check out Nintendo Online membership. I know that paying monthly for retro games is also a bit of an overkill, but it is still probably the easiest, cheapest, and the most official way to experience a lot of more obscure games. And you also can play Super Smash Bros. With 90% packet loss. And also emulating a game, just do it, just do it. I mean, technically all of the ports are emulating a game onto a modern console, so go right ahead. Oh, and if you're setting up your emulator and people came to knock on your door with baseball bats in their hands, don't tell them I advise you to do it. Oh, and just like I said, buy the ports if you can, as the companies actually get the revenue. And that's it. Look forward to my feature-length documentary about onions. I know it might sound weird. It will come eventually. It is an untapped market on YouTube. Nobody dares to steal my idea, alright? Alright, bye.
哦，有哦，那是人质，操！